Today, we're diving into one of the most chilling cases in American history. We're talking about John Wayne Gacy. Now, on the surface, this guy was a pillar of his community, but what was going on behind closed doors was a complete and utter nightmare.
Okay, just look at this. This one photo says it all, doesn't it? In May of 1978, you've got John Gacy shaking hands with the First Lady, Rosalynn Carter. This guy had special security clearance. But fast forward just 7 months, and he's arrested for murder. It's insane. It really makes you wonder, how on earth did he hide in plain sight for so long?
Well, to really get how he pulled it off, we have to look at the mask he wore. See, Gacy wasn't some recluse, hiding away from the world. No, he was the exact opposite. He was out there. He ran a successful contracting business. He was a precinct captain for the Democratic Party. And this is the part that just sends a shiver down your spine. He volunteered as a clown, entertaining sick kids in hospitals.
And that contrast is just so jarring. On the one hand, you have Pogo the Clown, this character he created, who he called a happy clown. And then you have this, the cold, dead eyes in a police mugshot taken right after his entire world of secrets just imploded. The happy, friendly face and the horrifying reality hiding right underneath.
But here's the thing. If you actually look back at his history, that mask he wore, it had been cracking for years. I mean, long before anyone found out what was in his crawlspace, there was some major red flags.
So for starters, his childhood was rough. He had a really abusive, alcoholic father. But the biggest warning sign, the one that screams at you, came in 1968. He was convicted of sodomy with a teenage boy over in Iowa and got a 10-year sentence. But, and this is where it gets crazy, he only served 18 months. Why? Because he completely charmed everyone, became a model prisoner, and get this, he even helped build a mini golf course for the prison. Unbelievable.
And you know what? The system was warned. A psych evaluation from back then literally diagnosed him with an antisocial personality. The report pointed out his total denial of responsibility and how he always painted himself as the victim. And yet, somehow, he still got paroled. It's just mind-boggling.
So after he gets out, he moves back to the Chicago suburbs. He buys this normal, quiet-looking ranch-style house. And from that house, he begins a 6-year reign of absolute terror. And the whole time, his neighbors just thought he was this friendly, helpful guy who threw these huge summer block parties for the whole neighborhood.
His method was chillingly consistent, almost like a script. First, he'd lure a victim, usually a young man or a boy, with the promise of a job, construction work. Then, back at his house, he'd suggest a magic trick involving handcuffs. Of course, once they were restrained, the trick was over and the real horror began. He'd assault and torture them, and then he would murder them by strangulation, using this awful rope tourniquet method he actually called the rope trick.
33, that's the number. He was convicted of murdering at least 33 young men and boys. To put that in perspective, at the time, that was the most murder convictions for any single person in the history of the United States. The sheer scale of it is just, it's hard to even wrap your head around.
Think about that. For 6 straight years, he got away with it. Victim after victim just vanished, and nobody could connect the dots back to him. But then came December 1978. His very last victim would be the one to bring the whole terrifying house of cards crashing down. And it all happened so fast. His whole world unraveled in just 10 days. It starts on December 11th. A 15-year-old kid named Robert Piest vanishes after telling his mom he's going to meet a contractor about a job. And guess who that contractor was? John Gacy. The police questioned him the very next day, and as soon as they uncovered that old conviction from Iowa, well, let's just say the investigation went into overdrive. So they get a search warrant, and it was an absolute goldmine for them. They find handcuffs, a bunch of driver's licenses that didn't belong to him, even a class ring from another kid who'd gone missing. But the real smoking gun? It was this tiny little receipt from the pharmacy where Robert Piest worked. They found it in Gacy's trash. Turns out, a co-worker of Piest's had dropped it in the pocket of the jacket Piest was wearing that day. Okay, so with all this evidence piling up, the police put Gacy under constant surveillance. We're talking 24/7. And this is the point where the case goes from a missing persons investigation to something out of a horror movie.
And you won't believe Gacy's attitude through all of this. He knew he was being tailed, but he was so arrogant about it. He would actually taunt the detectives who were following him, even invite them out for a coffee. And then at one point he looks right at them and says this, Clowns can get away with murder. Can you imagine?
Well, the pressure finally got to him. On December 20th, a totally exhausted and disheveled Gacy walks into his lawyer's office, pours himself a stiff drink, and just confesses. He tells him everything. He admits that he'd killed all these people and told him exactly where they were, buried in the crawl space right under his house.
So the police get a second search warrant, but this time it's to excavate the property. Gacy actually drew them a map of where to dig. The scene they uncovered was a complete nightmare. They found 26 bodies packed into that tiny crawl space covered in lime. They found 3 more buried in his yard, and then he told them he'd thrown the last 4 victims into the Des Plaines River. Why? Because he had literally run out of room under his house.
The recovery effort was just this grim, painstaking job. It was more like an archaeological dig than a crime scene. The bodies were so badly decomposed that a field of science called forensic anthropology became absolutely crucial. By studying nothing but the bones, these experts were able to identify 22 of the victims, finally giving some answers and a name back to their heartbroken families.
But uncovering the bodies? That was really just the beginning of the story. The aftermath of this case would end up changing the justice system and police work forever.
So at the trial, Gacy's defense tried the insanity plea. They claimed he had multiple personalities. But the prosecution? They painted a picture of a man who was sane, methodical, and completely in control of his actions. And the jury bought it. They deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding him guilty on all 33 counts of murder. The sentence was death, and he was executed by lethal injection on May 10th, 1994.
But the thing is, even with Gacy gone, the story isn't over. Not for the victims. The human cost is still there. Over the years, with new DNA technology, they've been able to identify more and more of them, some as recently as 2021. They're up to 28 identified now. But that means 5 are still unidentified. 5 families who still don't have an answer. It's just this painful, lingering mystery.
So after all these years, why do we still talk about this case? Well, one of the biggest reasons is how it completely changed the way police handle missing persons cases. Before Gacy, if a child went missing in Illinois, police often had to wait 72 hours before they could even start an investigation. Can you believe that? The public was so outraged by what happened to Robert Piest that it led to a new law that got rid of that waiting period entirely. And that change was a huge first step toward the Amber Alert system we all know today.
Ultimately, the Gacy case forced everyone to confront a really terrifying thought, that evil doesn't always look evil. It can be your neighbor, the successful local businessman. It can even be the friendly clown. This case changed laws. It pushed forensic science forward. But it leaves all of us with a really haunting question. How many other monsters are out there, hiding in plain sight, just wearing a mask,